Black queen, you're immaculate. It's coming that the world ain't ready for your magic yet. And that was never your fault, man. I guess they couldn't hack it yet.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Black Tech Unplugged. I'm joined with a very special guest, Tariq. So, Tariq, do you want to do a quick intro of yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Tina. I'm Tariq King. I'm currently VP of Product Service Systems at EPAM. Kind of spent my career in technology. Originally from Barbados, so kind of a island-grown person, but moved to the US for university. So I've been here many, many years now, and I'm just excited to be here.
Yes, and I'm very excited to have you. And to start off the podcast, and you've given a little bit of this already, I usually kick off with something called the check-in. So the check-in, you already gave your name, and we usually talk about where you're based. We talked about your current role, but then also how many years you've had in tech.
Yeah, so so kind of in my current role at EPAM as a kind of VP of Product Service Systems, sounds like a real fancy title, but I'm really lying at the intersection of software products and services, right? So EPAM is a consulting company, but we also work a lot on open source initiatives. So we have a lot of open source products out there that we use to accelerate our services. So my portfolio kind of lies in that mix of the world. I first kind of got into technology from a professional standpoint in 2009 when I became a professor at North Dakota State University, and then made a transition 3 years later into the software industry. And so I've been kind of in industry positions ever since 2012.
And Tariq, I would be remiss if I didn't mention all of the things that you've done, because you're mentioning that small part about being VP, but you're also a recognized thought leader in software engineering, DevOps testing, and AI and machine learning. You talked about your current role, but you've also been in the industry for over 15 years, and you've held a lot of different positions like chief scientist, head of quality, director of quality engineering, and manager of engineering. So you've had a lot and a long list of roles for your career and a variety. So in your current role, you mentioned that you're on the consulting side, but then there's also that piece of strategy. But how did you find your niche in tech? Because you've done a lot of different things.
Yeah, I would say for me, it started a lot to kind of figure out like where in tech I wanted to be. Actually in college when, I went to Florida Tech, and Florida Tech was pretty unique when it came to software testing, because not many universities have a software testing focus, number one, even at the undergraduate level especially. And we actually had two different great minds in software testing, James Whitaker and Kem Kaner. So it was actually like the only elective that you could take two different times with two different professors and get credit for it. So it was when I met James Whitaker, and James he used to start each class by coming in and showcasing like, well, where you could kind of make Windows crash or crash one of the Office applications. This is not to pick on Microsoft, but that was one of the big things that his lab was doing back then, was actually working with Microsoft to help improve the quality of their products. And I was just so fascinated by just the thought process of how to kind of dissect the software. Someone tried to build it and they had that creative process, but it was kind of a much harder problem to figure out, like, how do you make sure it actually is going to withstand, that exercise in a real environment using real users, right? Could you bring it down? Could you bring down the operating system with it? And so I knew from that, hey, testing was where it needed to be for me, because it was just one of those. I'm also a big fan of the underdog, right? And it felt like testing was kind of the underdog in engineering. And I'm always a big fan of rooting for the underdog in sports and in life. So.
And you mentioned going to college for computer science, but I want to even take it back to your childhood. Did you know going to college, like, you really wanted to be in tech? Where did you first get that introduction of tech as a career?
Yeah, so this is kind of like 3 years old, and I'll tell you how that happened.
Okay.
So, at a very young age, I was very fascinated. This time, so without giving away too much about when I was born, but computers were a relatively new thing in terms of home personal computing. And my stepdad at the time, he was a police officer, but he had bought a brand new PC, like a Commodore 128. This is back in those days. And there were games for it. And I was kind of intrigued, obviously, as a child might be, like, hey, I want to play video games. And he basically told me, like, look, you can play video games, but you have to learn how to use the computer. And furthermore, you need to learn how to program the computer. And of course, I had no idea what he was talking about. But back then, you could buy these books where there were programs that were pre-written, and you could basically write them out in BASIC and run them on your computer. So you could write a game literally by copying text out of the book and running it, right? And there was an interpreter back then. And so I wrote my first set of programs at 3 years old. And it was from then I knew, like, hey, you know what? And, kudos to him for saying, like, this is not just a toy, like there's more behind it. And so try to get to learn how it works. And so from that, and I remember ever since that, like even then as I got older and I got my own personal computer, my mom bought it for me. And then, I was like, oh, well, I want a CD-ROM. And one day she came home and I had picked the whole thing down and she walked in the room and she's like, what have you done? Have you destroyed the computer? And I was like, mommy, just like, leave me alone. I know what I'm doing. Right. Yeah. And basically I'd put together like my own sound card and everything and put it in. And, I was just kind of knew that tech was for me from even a very early age going through adolescence.
I think you are the first person to say at 3 years old that you were writing code. That's just crazy to me. I can't imagine like at 3 years old even having the wherewithal to do that. So that's amazing.
Yeah, well, the power of video games. When you really want to, like, find something that, is enjoyable. And then, and I try to use this with my kids now, like they're very into like Roblox and a lot of these games. And it's a very good motivator to kind of introduce them into the world of tech. Like, hey, you like this thing so much. Do you know how it's built? Do you know how it works? And that curiosity just sparked from an early age for me. So
I love it. I'm happy that you kept with that curiosity and wanting to grow your knowledge. So I do have to ask, what has been your motivator to continue on? So if you started at 3, and then let's also add your industry experience. So 15 years in the industry, you're already at 18 years. How do you keep that motivation for wanting to be in tech?
Yeah, for me, it is kind of like you see that the world has gone in this direction. And of course, even from an early stage, we didn't know exactly how everything would unfold. But I think you could tell that software was here to stay and that it was only going to get better, and things like the internet and just communication over the wire. Like for me, it was just like this kind of looking at this constant evolution of technology, and then thinking to myself, like, how can I stay at the forefront of it all, right? And so even up to now, every year I challenge myself, and I kind of set like one goal every year to say, like, hey, this is the one thing that I want to be on top of, because this is like a trend. So one year it was microservices, another year, which took actually spanned a few years, it was AI and machine learning for me. And that has continued. So I think by just challenging yourself to actually recognize, like, hey, this thing is moving fast. So how can you move with it and not stay stagnant? And that is the continual motivation. And as long as new things keep happening in tech, then you should continue to, and I continue to evolve with it.
Tariq, I have to ask, so what is your plan for 2023? What are you focused on?
Yeah, well, 2023 is all about the metaverse, which is actually kind of like a continuation of some stuff that I started in 2022. So 2022 was all about video game testing, because it was kind of a very hard, underrated area, right? Where, like, we have automation for all sorts of web apps, the mobile apps, but the automation for games was limited. And then combine that with advances in AI, machine learning, and computer vision. So I spent a lot of time in 2022 focused on gaming. And at the tail end, you started to see how that technology and those experiences are coming together for the metaverse. Of course, games are a very good example of, you know, this kind of preliminary look at the metaverse when you start talking about AR and VR. So it's kind of funny that it's full circle. You asked me like, how did I start? And it was because of games. And where I am today is like, oh, it's about the metaverse, but it really stems from a lot of the advancements in gaming and trying to automate games using reinforcement learning and different AI and machine learning techniques.
And you know what? I'll come back and touch on the metaverse because I do want to ask you some more questions around that. But I do want to go back to the point in regards to you staying ahead of the curve and staying curious, because it's your curiosity that's keeping you in tech because you're constantly learning the new things. But I feel like you use that curiosity to also help you with the variety of roles that you've had within tech. And I want the listeners to hear a little bit more of the different roles that you've already had in tech, because I want them to see that there's a lot of different roles, especially from the testing and AI and machine learning world. There's so many different areas I can say because you have a range of knowledge and expertise. But let's just high level walk through some of the roles that you've had and maybe some of the characteristics that individuals who are looking to get into tech, they can kind of align to.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's kind of like a very full career path that you can follow. And so for me, like, I think I came into industry in kind of an individual contributor role as a principal architect. So for me at that time, it was actually pretty exciting because I knew like I didn't want necessarily to have people report to me, but I wanted to lead like technically. I wanted to be a technical leader and help engineers with best practices or help building out frameworks. And so I actually started by building out test automation frameworks and porting existing automation over and helping to train and teach engineers on good practices for, you know, building software engineering with quality built in, but then also thinking about how do we test and how do we actually pick the software apart and apply those techniques in a more formal way, as well as bringing your creativity to the table. So it was all about that individual contributor life for me and staying hands-on and technical and keeping my coding skills in check along that path. And then I got a great opportunity to actually become a manager. And the cool thing about my first management position was that I was a manager of engineering and my direct reports were mainly folks who were architects. So it was kind of a natural evolution where like I had been an architect for 3 years or 4 years and I was very comfortable. And then I realized like, hey, I'm actually very comfortable. I'm not, you know, growing in this way. And then that started to bother me that I felt like I was just coasting at the same level. And then I knew it was time to kind of take on something differently. But I also didn't want to necessarily, people always say, well, oh, like you either become a manager or you're a technical person and you can't do both. I actually, similar to like dispelling myths about being a professor and then moving into industry, I wanted to make sure that people knew like there's a way for you to still get into people leadership and helping people to grow technically and as well as leaders, and still keeping your technical chops together. And part of that was for me, even as a manager and helping people to grow and to learn, I was also still investing in courses and trying to help put material together to train folks. And part of that always involved a hands-on component to it. It wasn't just theoretical stuff. It was building out these courses and actually delivering them. So while I was a manager, I was still training engineers on how to build and employ best practices. The whole year of the microservices was building out a full reference architecture with other engineers and carrying them along as to how to do this. And then beyond that, it started to now move into, okay, well, what can I do next with this? And, you know, I moved into a director level position. And in that position, it became a little bit more strategic. And they started asking me about the future. And I said, well, the future, you know, of testing involves AI and machine learning. And so now that was kind of like this dual thing where, okay, hey, I was growing as a leader. I had more direct reports. I opened up my span of control. Right. I had the performance engineering team also reporting to me. So it wasn't just like straight engineers or testers, that was also performance and thinking a little bit broader. But then it was like, hey, what about doing a moonshot project on using AI machine learning for testing? And so I had a research team, all right? And so my day was very dynamic as I navigated as a director, and then would eventually become the head of their quality program, which was integrated with the architecture group. But then I had a life where, and again, this deals with being a leader, you have to delegate and have the right people. So I had leaders over performance, I had leaders over the day-to-day testing and the test automation frameworks. And then where I kept my leadership and hands in was with the development of the research and development products using AI and machine learning. And so that was kind of the career trajectory through what was Ultimate Software, now UKG, from principal architect to manager to director, then to head of quality. And then once I started driving that research and development project, I would leave Ultimate Software and actually go to focus full-time on applying AI and machine learning to the development of software testing products. So I joined Jason Arbin at Test AI as their chief scientist. So it was moving from a very large company into a startup environment, which involved number one, kind of being at that C-level and looking at the entire business, and now thinking of sales and marketing. It wasn't just engineering anymore. It was a whole new world of that. Of course, there's investors, there's all sorts of other things involved, even at the startup level. But then that, again, was now another point for me to say, look, I kind of have mastered, in quotation marks, no, to me, I've never really fully have a grasp on a subject to that degree, but I've become proficient in certain things. But where can I challenge myself to grow? And that always is an element of something new and unknown. And for me, that was the startup world, because I'd never worked for a startup before. And so chief scientist, AI and machine learning, also leading their platform team. So still leading engineers that were building a platform for delivering AI and machine learning experiences for software testing products. And that was all great and exciting as well in terms of that chapter. And then just to kind of complete the step here now is kind of I moved from a startup environment actually into a very global company. So EPAM is in 58 plus countries now, I believe, and over 60,000 employees. So nothing that I've ever seen before. Ultimate Software, when I left, was about 5,000. My team at Test AI was max 40 people, and now to 60,000 that are spread across the globe, doing stuff at a very massive level. So you're right, it's been a journey across many different things. And for me, I think as long as you are challenging yourself and not putting yourself in a box, which is also one of the things I like about EPAM now, is I'm experiencing more growth than I probably have experienced in that entire journey right now, because of this very global company spread across the world that is working in engineering excellence, testing, quality. I can support the data practice. There's all these clients that we support that are all different shapes and sizes. There's this at first it was actually a bit overwhelming to kind of soak in the scale, but now I'm kind of getting a little bit more accustomed to the level that it's operating at. And then services versus building product was also a different transition for me. So I keep going.
Yeah, and actually, where you mentioned different people, different personalities, different sizes. And you definitely get that when you start getting into a manager or leadership position. So I definitely have to ask you, from going from individual contributor to a leadership role, what type of mind shift did you have to have in order to be a successful leader?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Dina. The approach that I have to leadership in general has been one, and I think I've picked up and learned from different folks along the way, is one where, number one, I think software and technology has some of these kind of logical flow bases that we like look back to. Like there's a mathematical foundation for this. This is a program, like, and there's all this going on. When you start dealing with, and of course there's issues and things that might be unexplainable, but as an engineering mindset, you're trying to find this kind of logical thing. Of course, people can still be logical. This is not saying that people aren't logical, but there's a whole set of emotions that are the core drivers for things, right? And so for me, like, it is really about caring about people, and that's where the core comes in. And there's an element of problem solving involved still, but it's just very different because the problems that you're trying to tackle and the source of where you're going to find your information lies kind of all in a lot of complex dynamics and interpersonal relationships. And so I looked at it as, well, how can I learn more about like people's behaviors and about emotional intelligence and asking the right questions and just active listening. And you know, there's a whole body of knowledge out there. Again, similar to the engineering world, you can go and learn a lot about a programming language and about how to build systems and architecture. Well, there's an equally big, if not larger, body of knowledge out there around how to learn how people interact, how they operate, how they deal with conflict, and so on. So navigating that line was something that I think, of course, was a challenge for me at first, because it was one of the things when I first got into an individual contributor role, I said, yeah, I don't want to deal with people's issues. Like, I don't want to deal with your PPO or your family. I just want to build this product. But of course, life was never that simple anyway. Even in my role without direct reports, still had to work with people, still had to collaborate, still as a human being had to have care and compassion for my coworkers. And so I ended up kind of doing some of those things anyway. And I because of the teacher side of me, really love to see people grow. And then I just kind of took that and said, okay, this is who I am as a leader. I'm someone who's there to listen, to facilitate, to help people grow, and then to not be held on to holding on to them in my organization, but letting them grow and letting them move on. And someone else is going to come along and you're going to continue to do that. Right. So yeah, really, for me, I started to find that part of it a hard problem to solve, and one that challenged me. You might not know, but I'm very introverted, not super on the introverted side, but I am introverted. And people are like, oh, you're such a great speaker, you interact and you're so animated. And I was like, well, I work hard at that. And it's the same thing with leadership. I worked hard to kind of start to learn from others how to become a good leader and how to really navigate that world.
Yeah, I definitely never would have said you were an introvert, because even when we met at a conference. Mm-hmm. I don't remember all of the details, but it's like, first off, you kicked off the conference and you were a keynote speaker. So I shouldn't say automatically, but I felt like there was some form of extrovert in you. So I definitely am surprised to hear you're an introvert, but then I'm also glad that you say that, because a lot of times when people look at leadership, they expect everyone has to be an extrovert and they have to, know everything. And it's like, no, we're all learning. And introverts are people too, and we can help lead and be successful as a leader just as much as an extrovert. Yeah,
it takes some work, obviously, on the introvert's part, and I'm kind of like right over that line towards introverted, so I'm not far over, but so that's why it's hard for people to tell, because I think with especially when I get in front of a crowd to teach. Because I have a passion for teaching, it's easy to kind of just draw people in. I like to make a lot of jokes as well too. Even my daughters would tell you like I have bad jokes. They're all dad jokes, but I'm actually liking the dad jokes. I think it's hilarious. But bringing that to the table helps me to kind of navigate into that world. But if you'll also notice, even at conferences, don't tell anyone, right? Even though we're recording this, sometimes I need to get away. And so I will escape back to my room and give myself a break from all of the constant interaction, because as you know, like with introverts, like that can be very draining, right? So I have it in pockets and I manage it, and I guess I don't hide it. I don't tell people, but I also know like, hey, like I need some time alone, so I'm just gonna dip out and then I'll be back. So
Yes, as introverts, we just need that little recharge session where you're like, okay, let's just get quiet for a little bit, charge up the battery, and then we go finish whatever we have to do, be it some more meetings, a conference, whatever we need to do.
yeah, for sure.
And I want to touch, Tariq, on the VP role. You've talked about it a little bit, but I do want to go into a little bit more detail about that. So first, I want to start off with breaking down the role itself. Like, what does the role actually mean? And we can use that by saying, like, what are some of your day-to-day responsibilities as VP and head of product service systems?
Yeah, so once you start talking about like any kind of senior leadership role, like specifically even a vice president role, it is where you are not just kind of stuck in the day-to-day of things. You have to really be strategic. You have to think longer term. You have to kind of look at the organization and the different factors that are at play in the organization, and really think about where we're going, how we're going to grow, and then how do I actually inspire, motivate, and get people behind the organizational goals in a way that it doesn't feel top down, right? That it doesn't feel like, hey, leadership is saying X, Y, or Z. Like, so for me, it is really one of those roles where, yes, you have to look at the business, and of course, everyone should be interested in business. Otherwise, you don't have a job. It's the number one thing. So there are business factors, and there are revenues, there are margins, there's all this aspect of operating a business and being profitable that are there as goals. But I always try to tell people that, yes, while you might be operating at that higher level and having those discussions, when it starts to come down to the team, you want to be able to translate those things into like, hey, what are you thinking about? What are your objectives? What are your key results that you're thinking about that you want to achieve this year that you think will help the business, right? And inspiring them to kind of organically come up with those things without it feeling like it came from leadership saying, well, you got to hit this target, you got to hit this target, right? So it's kind of this, again, it comes with the territory that I've been in, which is navigating like multiple worlds and kind of bringing them together and figuring out how to achieve success as a business, but also putting people first and making sure that they feel valued so that they can drive towards those business objectives. I always tell people like, you want to make sure that you put your employees first and that you motivate them. But you also want to remind those employees that the business itself is actually like being results driven and actionable and getting the business to grow is actually one of the most people first things that you can do, because the business is the thing that is taking care of all of these people. It's taking care of you and your family. And so if we run out of business, you know, all those people are impacted, right? So right. That's kind of the world that I navigate at that VP level, is trying to be business focused, technology focused. Of course, I have a portfolio of products and services that I take care of on a day-to-day. But really it's about mentoring and guiding and inspiring the leaders who are over those things to drive them to success. And just kind of trusting them to get it done.
And Tariq, being in the C-suite, I would say, or being a VP is not for the weak. Like, you don't see everybody trying to do it. And in fact, I feel like lately, like in the last year or so, you see a lot of people who are like, I don't actually want to do that. I kind of just want to stay that individual contributor in my career. So we'll put it this way, not everyone aspires to be in that role. What motivated you to not only become a VP, but stay at that level?
Yeah, and it was a combination. It was from, I think it started with Test AI and wanting to be even if it was like at a startup company, wanting to be at that level to see how the business was run, right? Because I'd spent all this time in engineering, and of course, sometimes if you're lucky, you get to interact with the customer, or you actually get to see them using your product. But most of the time, you're shielded from, a lot of the other stuff that goes on. There's a dedicated sales and marketing team and all this other stuff. But as I rose up the ranks at Ultimate Software, I got to be able to see some of the other aspects of the business, and that made me very curious about it. And then I wanted to know, because it was part of me also thinking about how can I become more entrepreneurial myself, right? And I think a lot of the times we're conditioned to think about working for someone else, but I was like, well, maybe one day I might want to work for myself, and what would that be like? And if I'm going to do that, I better learn about how to run a business, right? And what better way to kind of learn more about how to run a business than to actually move towards a role where you're actually being more and more involved in running the business, or how the business operates, and learning from experienced leaders who are and have been running a business for 25 years. Like, one thing I learned from early was the quickest way to learn something from the tech days is just like, find the person that knows the most about it and go you want to learn SQL? Find the best SQL developer that you can find in the company and spend some time with them. You will learn it quickly. So same thing applies on the business side. And so the inspiration for me was thinking about entrepreneurship. It was also another point of growth, as I mentioned to you before, and really trying to stretch myself to see like, hey, what does this thing look like holistically?
And I appreciate you bringing up the point of being in that role within a already established company, especially being around successful leaders to see how things are done. I think a lot of times people are kind of like thrown into entrepreneurship, but what better way to learn than seeing an established leader lead their successful company and learn while on the job? That is the greatest thing that you can do.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I think something that we haven't touched on that has also been very important in being a motivational factor for me has been that throughout my career, I've never really seen people that look like me in the roles that I've been in. And even from doing the PhD, so even before joining academia and finishing the school, it was like, I always told myself, like, I have to keep pushing so that I can be that for someone, because I wasn't seeing many people that look like me in those roles. And as I continue to do that, and as even I continue now, of course, there's more, and I've met wonderful people, even like yourself and Vernon Richards and other people in this space that are like, yes, we have representation. And then, for me, it was kind of an inward driver to be like, hey, you know what, go and show them that you can be anything that you really choose to be. And that's kind of also why my path isn't so straight. It is it is upward and onward, but it's definitely not straight in terms of discipline.
But first off, no one's tech career and tech trajectory is straight. There's always some kind of twist turn. If anyone has a straight trajectory, like, surprise me, I have to have them on the podcast. But I definitely understand that. One thing that comes to mind, though, especially being in a position where you don't see a lot of people that look like us, where do you go for like mentorship? Like, how do you, because there's some situations that only other people that look like us can give you, kind of some direction. So do you have an external support system that you turn to? What is your community like?
Yeah, so you just said it exactly. Like, my external support system has been the community, and it has been, and you'll see that I've been very active in the community as a result. But the kind of one of the key motivators was for me to kind of like find more like-minded people that have been in the same situations, and actually sharing and talking about these issues. And I've done everything from being on panels to leading panels myself in these areas, and actually in addition to trying to learn from other inspirational leaders that have gone through similar things to myself, is actually also trying to provide opportunities for others that, you know, look like a miniature version of myself. And, you know, I would have wanted someone like me to kind of, and being that mentor, right? So that's kind of where I find my support, is through community, through mentorship, and sort of like, you know, this fellowship that we can kind of bring together as Blacks in technology. As you know, I also was talking to you a little bit about my daughters and wanting them to make sure that they grow up with having an identity and people that look like them if they want to go into tech as well, right? So even from that perspective, like, I continue to find allies and support systems in the community, because there's always somewhere that I can either help and learn from throughout that, by just kind of hearing people's stories and sharing, as we are, you know, at the end of the day, are one people.
Yep. And that's exactly why I have the podcast, because as we learn, representation matters. If I don't see someone who looks like me that might either do the role that I want eventually, or doing what I want to do right now, how am I going to be motivated? Because a lot of times if I look around the room at certain positions, I don't see anyone who looks like me to say like, hey, this is actually attainable. So, and Tariq, to your point, yes, you are everywhere. So you are being one of those people that where representation matters, like people see you. And that's, I think, an excellent thing, especially within the tech community. I do have to ask though, from the perspective of finding your community, where do you usually kind of like network, or especially from an online perspective, where do you find people who are similar to you and have the same career aspirations?
Yeah, so there's a number of groups, and first of all, like, I should say thank you to you as well. You know, you talked about, even we first met at a conference. Well, we met at a conference where you were sitting on a panel that was similar kind of topics and trajectory, right?
Yeah.
But along the ways, like, I've seen different communities that help to support Blacks in technology, especially the Blacks in Technology group, or BITS, has been instrumental. I've also had like a number of contacts from the National Society of Black Engineers, and so they are out there, and I connect with these folks, and sometimes these people actually find me. And I put it on myself, because I think as I was coming up in my career, I hadn't, initially in the early stages, hadn't been involved with the community, probably until I would say I first started like actually doing, a lot of people don't know this, I actually first started doing public speaking in industry in 2013, 2014.
Okay.
So it hasn't really been that long. Before that, I was speaking at academic conferences when I published like my work as a PhD student and as a professor. But in industry, it has just kind of been a relatively young journey. So in general, like, I use LinkedIn to network a lot. I've joined a lot of these groups who have Slack channels, and there's support there. So it's just important to be plugged in wherever you can. And then one thing I found is just by kind of blogging or taking part in podcasts now is one of the things that I've been challenging myself with. You'll meet more and more like-minded people, and they'll come and say, hey, I saw your podcast on this, and what you said I really could relate with. And then so there's organic ways to kind of grow your community, but there are also like these targeted groups that are out there that you should definitely see if you can get involved with and contribute, right? Community is all about sharing.
Yes, all about sharing. That is definitely something that I hope community sharing and all that good stuff continues to grow in 2023. And Tariq, to end this portion of our conversation, I know that there are people who are listening and they're probably like, wow, I've never seen, especially a Black man in tech, be a VP. So for people who are listening and they aspire to be in a role like yours, what are 3 pieces of advice that you can give for someone who's listening in regards to how to get to that VP level?
Yeah, 3 pieces of advice. I would say the first one has to be kind of hard work, like kind of stay grounded and focused on developing yourself and just performing with excellence. Recognize that like you may not be the best at every single thing. I always try to tell people everyone has different gifts.
Yes.
And you may not have as many talents in some area as someone else, but with hard work, you can actually multiply some of your talents. So no matter what it is, just be known as a person who strives for excellence. And so kind of ground that. The other thing I would say to kind of people look at this and be like, oh, well, what can I do to better myself? But one of the biggest things that you can try to do is to actually help others and help other people grow. Like once you are now known as a person, and it doesn't matter who they are, especially if it's someone who actually can't do anything for you at the time, you just never know where that person is going and when they might turn around and bless you with something else. So also be a person who's known to kind of help others and invest in people, because those people, number one, just by doing that, you kind of lift yourself up with them as you go along, because they're there to support you and they become fans of you. And you just never know when something is going to turn around in a way where you're like, wow, like I helped that person. And then now they're here and they're providing an opportunity for me. And then the third thing I would say was just stay humble. It can become hard as you kind of move up through the ranks to just stay grounded and focused and not to feel like, hey, like I'm here and you're here. Again, that comes to do with how you treat people and finding that perspective and just knowing that like we're all on an equal playing field and you can all learn from each other. And the intern that comes in is just as much as valuable as the CEO who founded the company. And there's something that intern can teach that CEO and something that CEO can teach that intern. So don't ever let like where you're at skew your perspective as to what is important in terms of how you treat people and how you interact with them.
Excellent advice. And I appreciate you sharing that, Tariq. And given all of your broad knowledge about technology, I had to use the last half of the podcast to talk through some of the technology trends that we're going to see for 2023, because I needed your expertise. And to begin that conversation, I got to bring up Chat GBT. And so that's obviously a major player in the tech industry right now. Everyone's talking about it nonstop. And really AI in general is making big strides within the tech community. So from your perspective, what's your prediction in regards to Chat GBT and AI for 2023? What do you think we'll be seeing?
Yeah, so yeah, like you said, Chat GPT has taken like the world by storm here.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because I think when things like that happen, people tend to believe like, wow, like this is a very brand new technology that's now come on board and look at what it can do. But I think for a few years now, we've been telling people that AI and machine learning is going to take the world by storm. Mm-hmm. I think what ChatGPT has done is actually two things. It has made AI more visible to people and more user-friendly. So one of the trends, when you talk about trends that are going to continue in this AI space that we're going to see, I think people have always wanted to, because let's face it, there's a lot of skeptics out there about this technology, right? And what does a skeptic want to do? Well, kind of like Thomas, they want to feel and touch and figure out, like, is this real? So they want to see the AI. They want to interact with it. They want to ask it questions. And that's exactly what ChatGPT has done here. And I think when I think about AI, machine learning, and the technologies and the companies that are building these technologies becoming successful, they have to take a note from that book, in that if you're going to get successful adoption, you have to show your users or potential customers what the AI looks like and how it feels, and have them interact with it, because they've been longing to kind of do these things. And now for the first time, like, hey, they can actually do that. And a lot of that is, yes, visibility, but now the barrier for users to interact with these things is very low. Now, like, you can think, oh, I just need to ask this thing a question and give it context. Like, how much easier could it get to use anything? We do that stuff every day, even when trying to ask someone a question to get them to understand your point of view. You give them context and you pose the question and you put it out there, and then you get their thoughts on it. And that's like the interaction model for it, right? And of course, ChatGPT is not perfect. So I think we're going to continue I wouldn't be a good tester if I didn't say that one of the trends that we're going to see come into play is more and more focused on validation and verification of AI machine learning systems, because there's still always going to be a general lack of trust, and also a need to validate and verify that these things aren't causing harm to different groups that might already be at a disadvantage, right? So we definitely want to care about fairness and the trustworthiness of AI, and all of these things is still going to be a thing that's there. So that's my take on, we could talk forever probably about this technology, but that's my take in a summary of one of the major trends when it comes to AI machine learning.
And what is maybe like one or two other tech trends that you foresee in 2023? So some major key themes or players.
Yeah, so I think we haven't really been talking about it as much because AI has taken the world by storm, but we're seeing a trend towards like super apps, right? Like people want very highly configurable and composable applications, kind of like one app to kind of rule a lot of other apps and simplify life. So I think from a technology standpoint, we're going to see more of a development push towards building these super apps, and of course that's going to open Pandora's box on how do you test these things properly, how do you deliver them, and so on and so forth. So that's definitely like a key trend that I see continuing to be out there, and I think we're also going to see. So one of the things that has become kind of apparent in this day and age is that because of COVID, because of everything that we've gone through with the pandemic, there's a need for more automation and for people to be connected even when they can't physically be in the same place. And so obviously another big trend that I would have to mention is like this idea of the metaverse. Of course, there's a global push and global investment continuing to go on there, but understand it is really driven by the need for more automation, the need for deeper connection and experiences. And so in 2023, I think you can expect to see a lot more metaverse like experiences, a lot more improvements in technology, whether it be the headsets. I just read an article the other day about bringing smell into the world of digital experiences. And so there's actually a headset that was built that had like 5 or 6 different aromas that can be mixed together to simulate smell. So immersion is coming. So yeah, giving some spoilers because I'm supposed to talk about this next week too, but that's fine. But yeah, we're going to see a lot more of the metaverse in 23.
Interesting. Yeah, I never thought about getting smell in the metaverse, but that's interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I do see some really interesting concepts coming in for 2023. One that is also a little hard of a topic to speak on is we have been seeing a lot of tech layoffs, especially from the beginning of the year. What is your thoughts on that? Do you think that will continue throughout 2023?
Yep, that's actually, so we talked about bright tech, but now there's, we've seen the impacts, right, of many different things, including sort of the geopolitical unrest and stuff that has been happening. And that has really curbed revenues for tech companies. And so their response has been these layoffs. So they're already continuing, as a matter of fact. And it's one of those things that I think we will inevitably have to go through, but things will get better. And it's a matter of kind of weathering the storm and being supportive as people go through this, kind of economic crisis that is kind of hitting us all, right? Mm-hmm. But as you know, like these things are things that shift and bounce back, and I've seen pockets. So there's actually like areas where, yes, there's these mass layoffs from even a lot of the tech giants. And then I see pockets of companies hiring, right, in the midst of this. And it's actually a good opportunity to rebalance some of these things in a way. But for us to also look towards becoming more operationally efficient and thinking thinking a lot more about how we scale and how we innovate. So my advice to folks, even though it's a difficult time, is to use that time. If you are part of a layoff, use that time to kind of invest and build up yourself and bring a new set of skills to your portfolio in that time, and just kind of be able to be a game changer in this aspect of how do we actually transform this industry, and think a lot more about how to automate and how to scale with technology. That's where the world is going. It's going towards this automation and efficiency. So yeah, it's a hard thing, Dina, and I think I know many people impacted. And the other thing I would say to people is just be there for each other, help people to get through it. There's no one that's kind of exempt from it. Like it's affecting everyone. So it's one of those things.
Yes, community is where it's at. So if you can help someone, always reach out and share roles. If you are going through it yourself, just know that there's a community that's willing to help you as well. I think that was really great advice, Tariq, and also a great way to kind of round out our conversation for today. I know we've covered a lot from your career to what you're doing currently. We even talked about some future tech trends, but do want to open the floor. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want the listeners to know? Any tips, advice, or anything else?
I would just say that, look for opportunities where I'm a big fan of innovation. And I think that one of the things that a good buddy of mine had said once is that constraints tend to bring innovation. So look for opportunities, I would say, to challenge yourself, challenge your organization to see how you can do something different. If you have an entrepreneurial spirit as well, use as an opportunity to maybe kick off your own business. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of think outside the box and do something new. I had a few meetings today with some folks that are bringing something, and they just kind of shared it with me, but bringing something really different to the table and to the market and to the tech space. And I was like, wow, that's like I can't share it, but that was like a really great idea. And it's almost like, why didn't I think of that? And it made me think like, well, you know what? I bet like there's folks out there that have these ideas and that think about these crazy things. And it just kind of takes this like leap of faith, or for something to be a catalyst to it. So I would say, again, fitting in with everything that we've talked about, from technology, from growth to even the dark side of like layoffs and everything, let it all come together. Everything is for a reason. Everything is for a purpose. And, try to leverage it to do something different or better yourself in some way.
And that is an excellent note to end on for today. Tariq, thank you so much for your time today. You definitely are leaving us with a lot of knowledge, and I greatly appreciate that.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dina. It was a pleasure.